Aviv Tov. Aviv Sameach.
Happy English muffins. Yay.
Yeah, okay. Our topic today is different than what we've done before, in that although we did do something on Proverbs, right, this last month, so this is maybe a continuation of that, that we branched into a different kind of literature that usually I have done with you folks, and that would be narrative prose, sometimes prophecy. I would imagine we've done over the years Psalms, not because I checked, but just because I've done a lot of that's one of my interests. And I'm not really much of an expert on Shir HaShirim, Song of Songs, but I was asked to do something before this year, Pesach, and I was asked to kind of combine those things together. So I came up with the title Shir HaShirim in the Haggadah and in the Aggadah. And what I mean by that was to present at least the idea of a custom that exists that not a lot of American or / Ashkenazi Jews, I would say, know about, and to use that as the place that Shir HaShirim plays in the Haggadah, or at least in the night of Seder. Talk a little bit about that, to talk about how at least one 13th, 14th century rabbi understood the connection between Song of Songs and the night of the Seder, and to use that as a vehicle to begin to explain a little bit about, that would be Song of Songs in the Haggadah, to explain a little bit about Song of Songs in the Aggadah. Haggadah, as you know, is the book that we call that telling of the story. The Haggadah in Hebrew is to say something. It's a parallel to Amar or Diber. And Aggadah is really the same word, it's just in an Aramaic form. When we say Aggadah, I'm sure it would imagine you've heard over the years that it has to do with midrash, embellishment of the biblical stories, the biblical text. Basically, we have two kind of major genres of midrash. One would be midrash halacha, that is looking at the biblical text to figure out what we do, how we act, and the practice of being Jewish. And midrashay Aggadah, which is how we look at the biblical text, biblical, not just mostly the Torah, but not just the Torah, of course, and how we look to feel and think and believe. So one is practice, the other one is, faith would be too narrow, but it has to do with emotions, it has to do with humor, it has to do with belief, it has to do with trying to have a better understanding of the biblical text from the narrative point of view, right? Filling in all the gaps that we have in biblical text. Okay. Song of Songs is particularly challenging / different in that when you read through the Song of Songs, maybe I'll just ask, has anybody ever studied or read through at least the Song of Songs? Marcia, is anybody here an expert, perhaps more than I am, so I know that I should curb my words?
I don't think of myself as an expert, but I'm a chazan, and so I'm deeply interested in the arrangement of it, the organization of male and female voices. There are certain things that I pay close attention to, not
Wonderful.
the same things that you will, though.
Wonderful, though, and that of course is, so. Let's go back to what Chazan Marcia just mentioned. Is that this is love poetry? This is erotic love poetry. Not all of it is so erotic, but some of it is pretty damn erotic, I would say, with the rabbinic voice. Pretty damn erotic, and surprising. And we'll talk a little bit about surprising, because what is it doing amongst the 24 books of the Hebrew Bible? We'll talk a little bit about that today. And what we don't do today, we'll do next time. The 4 pages of text that you have today is designed not to try to do it in one day, as I often do, but this, to begin with, a priori, lechatchila, to do it in 2 times. I hope that we can finish this in 2 times. And basically, Song of Songs is this collection of poems. There are those scholars who have tried to connect it all together into one very understandably edited version. I am of a different school. Many of you know over the years, the person I quote the most in Bible studies is my friend and teacher Yair Zakovich of Hebrew University. And his approach to this was that there are a series of poems. There are various poems that have been brought together, and the best way to look at them our best way to look at them is as they are independent units, as opposed to trying to spend time connecting them one to the other. That's beyond what we can do here. What I want to do with you is to look at one particular verse to illustrate the connection, at least in some people's mind, to Song of Songs to the evening of the Seder. The other one is to look at one that brings out a different aspect of Passover as Chag HaAviv, the springtime holiday, and to see how that was dealt with. I'm going to put a link here in to this particular. Oh, did that go to everybody? No, that I know. Let me. Did it go to everybody? Yeah. No.
Yes.
It did go to everybody.
Oh, no, it didn't. It didn't.
No,
It just
no, everyone in the meeting. Sorry. Okay. That would have been Madalena's fault that it didn't go to everybody. Okay. Everybody here knows Madalena, by the way. Do you guys all know her? Yeah. Cool. So just I can have humor with her because we're old friends. That's how I can get away with it. Okay. So take a look at this, not now, of course, but this is a good kind of a synopsis of how Song of Songs was treated in rabbinic literature. Also how it got into the canon, perhaps. We'll take a look at that a little bit later. But for now, though, I want to start with the text. Does everybody have the text in front of them, or do I need to put it on the screen? Tell me if you need it on the screen, only because, okay, great. So I like to do it this way. Of course, I didn't print it for myself, but let's go ahead. So Ria, do you want to read the first one for us? This is Rabbi Yaakov Chaim Sofer, who's a 20th century Sfaradi, Mizrahi scholar in the land of Israel, in pre-state Israel, who writes a commentary which becomes a rather authoritative commentary on the Shulchan Aruch. Shulchan Aruch, Rabbi Yosef Karo and Rabbi Moshe Isserlich, 16th, 17th century, Tzfat and Krakow. The basic work, I think, as everybody here knows, of Jewish law, and the major commentary on the Shulchan Aruch for the Ashkenazic world was and still is, I think, Rabbi Yisrael Meir Kagan's Mishnah Brura. Yisrael Meir Kagan is better known as his pen name, the Chofetz Chaim, not his pen name, the name that he was given, the Chofetz Chaim, because he didn't sign his work. He was out of modesty. The Chofetz Chaim is a book on how we learn how to speak properly. He has a long list of books about speech and things like that. But his most influential work, I would say, far more in the yeshiva world than, because yeshiva boys still gossip, right? But his more influential is the Mishnah Brura, which is his commentary, beginning of the 20th century. The parallel to this in the Sephardic yeshiva world would be Kaf HaChaim. Okay, so go ahead, Ria.
Okay. The righteous and pious will recite the Song of Songs on Leil Shemurim, the night of Pesach. I didn't know this at all. Okay, anyway,
That's why I
my
asked you to read it, because I knew that you didn't know that.
Rabbi Wise says that after reciting the Haggadah, one shall joyfully chant the entire Song of Songs at this time of freedom. A little editorial here from me that this is better than the Haggadah. Oh, this would be a better tradition. Okay, at the time that the nightingale arrives, for the upper worlds are illuminated and shining, and some will afterwards sing the poem of Haggadah, as it too speaks of Exodus from Egypt and all future redemptions.
Okay, now we're gonna be honest here, right? I mean, assuming that maybe we have folks that grew up in the yeshiva world, in the very orthodox, very thinking orthodox world where the Haggadah was done all the way through. Perhaps even in the conservative movement, you found that you went through everything, you talked about everything, and you still had, after 4 cups of wine, where you drank the majority of each cup of wine, not grape juice, you still had the stamina and the energy to sing Haggadah or Haggadah, those various songs that have been added to the Haggadah, which, by the way, were not written for the Haggadah. They were written as wedding songs, songs that were done in different situations, but added to the Haggadah to keep people together. It's a lovely thing. Keep people together. They're happy. Keep them celebrating, right? We don't want them running off to the bars and to the pubs afterwards, which is the original meaning of the Afikoman, not to go after to eat after the Afikoman.
Oh,
But but can you imagine? Can anybody imagine the in between you read those chapters of Shir Hashirim, and let's say you read them in a joyful, and you sang them, and let's say you even understood them as well. It's a lot to do, and yet it's there in that world. So let me ask folks, here's something most Ashkenazim don't know, which is why I bring it first. It's odd that I would bring something from 20th century Sephardic halachic posek halacha from Eretz Yisrael, because that's very much part of the Jewish people. And we have this, I'm not speaking for everybody here, because I don't know everybody here, but often in the United States, certainly in Sweden, when I was the rabbi in Sweden, we have a very Ashkenaz-centric view of what Judaism is. Judaism is the shtetl, and it's Yiddish, and it's Shalom Aleichem, and it's all these. Now, Judaism is a lot more things beyond that. I think depending on where you live, I think many of us know that, especially since the influx of so many Israelis to the Southern California. So you've got this minhag, this custom that's out there. Good to know about it. What's the connection that he brings here? Did anybody understand why we would do it? Marcia?
Marcia.
Marcia, sorry.
Because of this notion that the Shir Hashirim is an allegory for redemption and for unity with the one, with God.
Right. And so we'll get to the thing of the allegory of redemption. We're going to get to that's certainly in the background here, and we're going to look closer at that in just a moment. But he says he also brings it into the mystical world, the oneness with God, the alignment of the worlds. In other words, this is an opportune time because people, I don't want this to get lost. People have devoted hours, families, children, adults, to telling the story of Yetziat Mitzrayim, telling the story of how God became the God of Israel, how God became the one God of the world, at least in Israelite eyes of telling of the biblical story. This is when it happened. It happened at the Exodus. And we tell that story. We live that story. We eat that story. We internalize the message. Remember, I think I brought during Proverbs the idea of internalization of a message of Ezekiel eating the scroll. We eat the matzah. That's where we reach the highest of highest, and to bring the worlds aligned. Far be it from me to make more comment about this. I don't know much about mysticism, Jewish mysticism, but it's in the background here. Okay, so we have this particular custom, and just to give you the other side of it, from that same, not from the same section of the Shulchan Aruch, but from the section that covers Chol HaMoed. If Marcia, would you like to read number 2 for us? This is from Rabbi Moshe Isserlich's glosses on Rabbi Yosef Karo's Shulchan Aruch. One day we could do Shulchan Aruch if you want. It's a love, but anyway, but let's go ahead.
It is customary to read Shir Hashirim on Shabbat Chol HaMoed. If Shabbat falls on the last day of Yom Tov, Shir Hashirim is read then instead.
Okay, and I don't know, are you working at a synagogue? Are you at a synagogue, Marcia?
No, I'm not working as a chazan anymore. I'm the principal of a religious school.
Okay, and when you were, did you add Shir Hashirim to all the reading in the Haftarah and everything that was done when we had a Shabbat like yesterday? Day
Oh,
before?
absolutely. We didn't do all of it. We would do 1 or 2 chapters of it.
So
And
what is?
So for example, one year we would do chapters 1 and 2, and the next year we would do 3 and 4, and like that.
Right, and I think that's the approach. I would imagine that's the approach in many non-Orthodox synagogues, or maybe even non-super conservative, little c conservative synagogues. I did the same thing over the years as a Masorti rabbi in Israel.
Just one point. When I was serving with Rabbi Jeff Hoffman in Nyack at Congregation Sons of Israel in Nyack, he and his wife did it back and forth, mirroring the female and male voices. It was so beautiful.
Yeah, it is great. It's really so. If you haven't had a chance to read through, you don't have to read all of it. Pick up a Tanakh at some point, read through. We'll see a few verses coming up. I know I keep saying we're going to see, but this is all preparation for that. So there is a connection between reading Shir HaShirim, Song of Songs, Shir HaShirim on Pesach. I'm not sure everybody knows that, but and we don't know yet the connection. We'll find out one theory in a moment. But but most of us know the custom of reading it in the synagogue. By the way, it doesn't mean that Sephardic or Mizrahi communities don't read it also. There's various customs there. I just brought the Ashkenazic, the prevalent Orthodox Ashkenazic custom, as it's mentioned here. There are 5 Megillot. Everybody knows. Some of them are like of course, we're going to read Megillat Esther on Purim, Eicha, Lamentations on Tisha B'Av, Ruth on Shavuot. You got to kind of fetch it a little bit to figure out exactly why, because it was the time of the reaping of the grain. But then you're left with 2 other Megillot, Song of Songs and Ecclesiastes, Kohelet, which is read in Sukkot, and maybe we'll go back to that in a second. At least some theories as to why we read them. Kohelet in the fall, but right now we look just for Shir HaShirim. We just look at this particular, and it's background for what's going to be said next for Rabbi David Abu Darham, who's a 13th, 14th century Spain. It's really kind of it might be the first kind of commentary we would recognize as a commentary of Jewish liturgy that we have with a lot of customs. But in order to understand that, let's just take a look at this one verse in Songs 1:9. Marcy, I didn't ask you before, but could you chant this for us, or is that too much to ask right now?
Much to ask if I can read it there. Well, hang on a second. I need to grab it.
Okay, you know what? I'll put it up on screen. I didn't mean to put you. I shouldn't have put you on the spot like that. Just a moment. Jeffrey, you're muted now.
Lissusamti verife faro dimiti rayati.
Right, and in English?
I have likened you, my darling, to a mare in the Pharaoh's chariots.
Right, and just this kind of thing that many wives want to hear their husbands say, or many women want to hear their partners say, or their men their partner, whatever it might be. It's not. This happens to be a man to a man to a woman, but I compare you to a mare amongst Pharaoh's chariots. Anybody offer any kind of want to offer any kind of commentary what that might mean in the context of the biblical context?
This is hilarious. It's what a compliment. Oh, my darling, you're like this female horse in the oh God.
But I'll bet there were a lot of jewels. I bet the horses were adorned with jewelry.
Oh, I know, but oh my goodness. So I guess you could look at it maybe as I don't know how it could be a compliment. Okay. I think it's funny.
Ria, what happens when they're? I mean, the horses that are pulling the chariots are male horses.
Okay, so but here's the thing. Here's the one female, and is she in heat? I don't know. Do horses go in heat like dogs do? I probably. And so, what a chariot ride! I don't know. My mind went.
Right. It's
Rabbi,
yes.
I used to work with horses for many, many years. And they would always say there's nothing like a good mare. If you have a good mare horse, most people would take that over a male horse. That they're much more dependable. really hardworking. So it's a much that's always a great tribute to a mare horse. That if you have a great mare, you can't beat it.
Excellent. So that would go from, for those that know horse racing, that would be a way of looking at this. In ancient Israel, we didn't have so many horses. In Solomon's time, there were a lot of horses, and that was thought to be a demerit against him for having so many horses. Deuteronomy explicitly says, don't have too many wives and don't have too many horses in the same breath. Yes, that's not me, that's Deuteronomy. But horses are identified with Egypt, with other Arab lands, perhaps. And so, as an Israelite, though, let me ask you this, James: you don't know anything about horses, and you, as a human being, we as human beings, we tend to anthropomorphize everything. We tend to project human tendencies. So, what would that look like if you projected human tendencies in the pre-feminist part of humanity? What might happen when a mare starts walking around where all the heated up male horses, of the chariots would be?
Well, actually, you can't have a mare in heat around stallions. You just can't. It's dangerous. It's absolutely dangerous.
So,
Actually, I don't know if the Egyptians did it, but most of your male horses are castrated.
right.
Because of that purpose. You can't handle them when they're not. Where a mare you can.
So I couldn't get you to take off your horse breeding hat there, right? You still went back to it, and you gave us more insight into that world. Whatever it is, though, I think that very often, and this is what happens in Jewish commentary, in the history of interpretation of this verse, very much is that people thought of horses as they do of human beings. Is a beautiful woman walks by amongst the warrior soldiers. Look, I remember when we started to have when my unit, I was a unit of yeshiva boys, and when we were already done, we were in reserve duty, and some of them became super extreme, and they refused to have women instructors when we had in reserve duty. We had to see what the improvements were made on the tanks and how to shoot and things like that, and they boycotted. They wouldn't have the women soldiers. I think, like, what's going to happen? Anyway, go ahead, Sylvia.
Well, I actually I think James's point is relevant to I can't anthropomorphizing what happens among animals, because you see a woman go by a bunch of guys who might be stallions or thugs or something like that. It could be very dangerous. Or it could be a compliment. Depends upon the guys, right? But it could be very dangerous for a woman.
Would you say here it's meant as here in this understanding of this verse, it would be a compliment or a danger?
Oh, well, I think he was trying to compliment the woman,
Yeah.
but I'm not so sure that if it were me, putting myself in that situation, that I might have taken it as a compliment.
Understood. Yes, Marcia.
I was thinking along two lines. First of all, that a beautiful a mare that's a show horse, like how beautifully they're cared for, how beautifully they're groomed and adorned, and then to clearly to drive the males a little crazy, and so that you're a distraction. Nobody can keep their thoughts straight. Nobody can keep their behavior straight when you're around, because you are that beautiful.
Yeah.
I love the look of a horse that's been groomed so beautifully, where the mane is braided and they wear gorgeous pieces on them. Yeah.
Stuart.
Yes, Rabbi. I listened to a recent shiur on this subject, and there's a fascinating historical background to this that's so authentic. But evidently, way back in the 14th century, BCE, the Egyptians squared off against the Hittites in a battle, and the Hittites were very heavily outnumbered. The Egyptians had more cavalry and more chariots. And so what the Hittites did, to take away the Egyptians' advantage, they used mayors, for their cavalry and for their chariots. And it made, the Egyptian, horses go stir crazy. And it just resulted in sheer chaos. So the battle basically, was a draw. So it's a very clever tactic on the Hittites' part, and it may be in the Song of Songs that this was an allusion, to that incident, that a mayor among Pharaoh's chariots, will just, drive, the stallions stir crazy.
Stir up crazy, right?
Right.
Excellent, great. Good. Thanks, Stuart. Thanks for adding that. And that all the stuff we've said here kind of got, other than perhaps Sylvia's post feminist looking at this, maybe not such a compliment, because again, who's writing all this literature? Who's writing all these commentaries? It's men. They tend to look at it in a positive way. It doesn't mean it's not right. It just means this is that what one finds in the literature. All these things are out there. So let's go back to this. After we've gone through this, let's see what Rabbi David Avudraham has to say. Stuart, if you could read this number 4 for us.
The Abudraham.
Yeah.
The people are accustomed to reading the Song of Songs on the festival of Matzot because it speaks about the salvation from Egypt, which is the beginning of the subjugation of Israel and their first redemption. As it is stated, Song of Songs 1:9, to a mayor in Pharaoh's chariot.
Okay, and this is all he says about the connection between Song of Songs and Pesach. Should we get a show of hands? How many people are convinced? Or, I mean, what do people think about this? He's actually said 2 different things here, or he's actually 3 different things. So one is the connection of Pharaoh. Well, you see, Pharaoh, Egypt, let's read it. That seems to be a little bit too shallow, perhaps, right? So what comes along with Pharaoh, the mention of Pharaoh?
Salvation.
The story, go ahead, Ria.
So this is referring to, this is our, what do you call it? Our beginning. This is our myth of how we began. And so it's all due to this mare in the Pharaoh's chariot, which is interesting. It has a fairy tale quality to it. So in our Haggadah, we have the hand of God. In Torah, we have Moses, the leader. And here we have a mare. Isn't that interesting?
Right. Although one might argue that perhaps it's just because, it's just an association, right? Pharaoh, that Sylvia?
Well, I'm reading it as because it speaks about the salvation from Egypt, which is the beginning of the subjugation of Israel and their first redemption. And then as it is stated, to a mare in Pharaoh's chariots, and a mare is tethered. I mean, she's not getting away. Like the beginning of what is the beginning of our subjugation. I'm seeing those parallels. I'm not seeing the parallels to freedom. I'm seeing the parallels to what happened in the beginning.
And look, what does he say at the very end of that sentence? I'm sorry.
And their and their first redemption. I get
First
that.
redemption. What first? How many redemptions were there? Does anybody know what he's referring to from a Jewish literary point of view? There are multiple redemptions. Does anybody want to talk about this? No? Right. Egypt is the first redemption, Gula, but there's also the redemption from Babylonia. Right. There's redemption that will come in the future. There's redemption from Cyrus, king of Persia. In rabbinic literature, there are from a historical point of view, there are a number of galuyot of exiles, number of redemptions, but all of them lead up to, and it's never the same. It's different numbers, it's different things. It's a very fluid kind of literary topos to talk about, but all of them lead to the same conclusion, and that's where you got to, Sylvia, I think, that the real redemption, the true redemption, the ultimate redemption is still yet to come, right? And that's how we end the Haggadah as well, right? That's very much in the ending of the Haggadah, the Shana Haba B'Yerushalayim kind of a thing, that thing. Okay, so Dan, I got a job for you. It's a number 5 as a. This is. It is Aggadah, but Avudraham barely. He just mentions that. Well, because Pesach is the time of redemption. Pharaoh, the horse of Pharaoh's mare brought that up. I think he just means that, oh, that's just like that. I think it's very associative. But really what he means, as you mentioned, Sylvia, is the redemption itself. That's like the real thing. And then how do you get from Song of Songs to redemption in general? Well, that's because what we're going to look now are a few examples of what was happening in the first millennium of the Common Era. We don't know exactly when, maybe 400 or 500, 5th, 6th century, maybe a little bit later. Aramaic Targumim, you probably ran into that before. By the time of the sages, the Chazal, although Chazal recorded their traditions in Hebrew, people were not reading Hebrew, or were not speaking Hebrew. They were speaking Aramaic, at least in the land of Israel. In Egypt, they were speaking Greek, hence the Septuagint, the Greek translation. Hence, Philo of Alexandria writes in Greek. Josephus, they say, was writing for non-Jews, but one might argue perhaps he was writing for the Greek reading population of Jews as well in his history. But we have this tradition of Targumim. Targum literally means translation. There are Targumim like Onkelos, which are relatively literal. That's the one that's printed in a rabbinic Bible. In Yemenite synagogues to this very day, in the more traditional Yemenite synagogues, as they read the Torah, somebody will read the Targum as well, the translation in Aramaic, verse after verse. Some of the Targumim, though, are not literary. They're not word for word. They're very, very, I keep wanting to say impregnated. They're pregnant, because I maybe there's a word in Hebrew that gives me that I know that's not the right word to use here, but they're embellished. They're as we'll see now. Here's an example of the Targum just on one verse. All this is just the Aramaic translation of Song of Songs on this one verse that we read. Go ahead, Dan.
When Israel went out from Egypt, Pharaoh and his army pursued after them with chariots and horsemen, and the way was closed for them on 4 sides. On the right and left were wildernesses that were full of fiery serpents. Behind them was the wicked Pharaoh with his armies, and in front of them was the Reed Sea. What did the Holy One, blessed be he, do? He revealed himself in the fullness of his strength at the sea. He dried up the sea, but the mud he did not dry up. The wicked, the mixed multitude of foreigners who were among them, said, he can dry up the waters of the sea, but the mud he cannot dry up. At that time, God became very angry with them and would have drowned them in the waters of the sea, just as Pharaoh, his armies, his chariots, his horsemen, and horses were drowned. If it had not been for Moses the prophet, who stretched out his hands in prayer before God and turned back the anger of God from them. And he and the righteous of that generation opened their mouths and sang songs. And they passed in the midst of the Reed Sea on dry land by virtue of the merits of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the beloved ones of God.
Does anybody remember the Woody Allen movie, What's Up, Tiger Lily? Well, it wasn't too popular, but it was a Japanese, was it a spy movie, I think? It was a Japanese movie that Woody Allen dubbed. Dubbed,
yeah.
Dubbed, right, dubbed. And of course, it was funny because there was like no connection between what I remember between the dubbing and what was happening on screen. I will tell you that I was doing a wedding in Budapest. I had been working for many years with the Masorti community in Budapest before I went to Stockholm, especially while I was in Stockholm. And there's one woman in that community who's extremely gifted. She's both Jewish and Christian, that she partakes in both traditions, very much part of that community, but she has an amazing skill of languages. And because many of the family members of the bride and the groom did not speak English, she simultaneously translated my ceremony into Hungarian. And I noticed that it was taking her a lot longer to translate what I was saying. Now, I knew where I was. I knew the people I was there for. I knew they were very secular, very Jewish, but rather secular. And especially the people who are not the young people that were in the community I work with were more used to talking about God, but not their. I talked about this with the bride and the groom, and the family. I didn't want to put them off, so my way of speaking was more of a not a secular, but what's a oh, what's that kind of Judaism that's based in Detroit?
Humanistic.
Humanistic, thank you. It was kind of a more of a humanistic. It's a very yeah, humanistic theology that I use. But anyway, and then I heard one word that kept being coming up more and more, and was a word that I purposely left out. I wasn't using God language, but she kept saying Ishtana, and I happen to know that Ishtana is God in Hungarian. And then I realized what she was doing. She was putting God back into everything because of her own thing into my translation. That's just a funny story of what happens, I think, sometimes in translation. Not lost in translation, but impregnated in translation. Again, I don't know, probably a better word than that. So that's what this is. This is all on one verse, right? And if you look in the Targum of Shir Hashirim, that's what this is like. It goes on and on and on. And it's a retelling of the biblical text, which is abstract poetry or erotic love poetry, but putting it in the framework of narrative prose, and with lots and lots of embellishments. And in Avudraham's knowledge and conscious of Shir Hashirim, and in, I would venture to guess, every other rabbi from the first, second century of the Common Era going forward, and very possibly before that as well, this is not a song about men and women, a man and a woman. This might be there, it might reflect some of what they're feeling, but that would not give it the weight to be included in Scripture. I think that many of us would like it to be that way. I don't. And there are perhaps scholars that say that's why it is included, because it is this wonderful love story or series of scenes of love stories between two loving people. But because it was well known as an allegory for the connection between the people of Israel and God. Reactions, Dan? Did you want to say something?
No, it's my first encounter with Song of Songs. I was freshman in college, and I was reading a Bible. I don't know. I was not in that mode at that time. It's just filling in a gap. And I came across a Song of Songs, and it was brand new to me, never anything like it before. And so I took a particularly hot and ardent passage, and I copied it out in a letter to my girlfriend, who was still in high school. I was a freshman in college. And she was very impressed and said, this is how I want to encounter Bible. To me, I'm sorry, I've lost, we have not kept the letters because we've married near 60 years now. But that was my first encounter with Song of Songs.
First of all, we're happy to hear you didn't go to jail. That's first of all. Because that could have been interpreted in a very different way. You may have wanted to study Bible that way, but somebody else may have read that very differently. Great story.
The second encounter was 10 years ago. I was visiting our nephew in Jerusalem, and he married into a Mizrahi family. And we were there over a Shabbat. And so I went with him to his in-laws' synagogue. And as part of service, they read entirely through Song of Songs, but not just, it was a young boy, not quite bar mitzvah age, who just ripped through the whole thing. And I said to Joshua afterwards, what's that about? Why do you do that? He said, I don't know.
So I'm glad you brought that up. That would eventually come up in our conversation today. While many of us know that as part of the liturgy, from a liturgical point of view, of reading it on at some point on Pesach, in the Sephardic world and in the Mizrahi world, and I don't know about the Hasidic world. I think check I check. It's not in Chabad. It's not in the Chabad custom. The Chabad custom, though, is not all that indicative of the general Hasidic world. I think the liturgies that were informed by Kabbalah added this to pre-Kabbalat Shabbat. It's a pre-Kabbalat Shabbat reading, and you find this. Now, not everybody shows up that early in these kinds of synagogues, and that is a bizarre thing. I hadn't seen that before, but I'm not surprised to hear that give it to one of the kids to read. It's kind of a rite of passage of being able to read it, which is a little bit absurd. Just shows that they're not really paying attention to the words. And this is in Israel, right, Dan, where kids
Yeah, in Pesach Zev.
but it's very poetic. Yes, Marcia.
Was thinking that that tradition would mirror why we give Anim Zmirot to a young boy to read.
Exactly.
Right? That they're not thinking the way an adult would think about it. And the other thing I wanted to really ask was, so in my mind, when I read and think about Shir HaShirim, I think this is a collection of love poetry that shares a lot of thematic things that link it. It doesn't link up in any kind of story fashion, but it links up through a lot of the metaphors and a lot of the imagery and a lot of and the way it's structured linguistically.
Mm-hmm.
And the only way to get it into the canon is to give it this other gloss. But I think of it as being that the redemptive spiritual thing is the gloss on top of the love poetry, not the other way around.
Mm-hmm. Yes, in other words, there's pshat and drash, right?
Yes.
Yeah,
So,
and that's what we share because we live in that progressive liberal part of Judaism,
right.
that accepts biblical criticism, that accepts that and it would be interesting to hear what Ibn Ezra or if Rashbam doesn't have a commentary on that's Rashi's grandson who wrote a very pshat kind of commentary to the Torah and also on Kohelet, by the way. But maybe there was. I need to look at and see if there was a. Which, by the way, just reminds me that Sarah Kamin of blessed memory, another professor at Miami University, a wonderful, wonderful scholar who was a scholar of medieval biblical interpretation. Her thesis, which is well accepted, I think, is that Rashi's commentary on Shir HaShirim was an answer to Christian commentary, monastic commentaries of the time, which are already based on church fathers of seeing Song of Songs, the relationship between God and the church, or Jesus and the church as well. But that's great. Yes, Sylvia.
I kind of is remembering something that we studied. I don't know, I can't remember who it was with, but it was here, I believe, that Song of Songs was one of the last Megillah to be canonized. And apparently one of the stories is that it was because there's, I don't know which rabbi it was, who loved this Song of Songs, and he wanted to save it from the bawdy houses because
Right.
it's very erotic.
Well, we're going to get to that. Well, we may not get to it today, but it's on this sheet, that the main source of what you're talking about right now, which is a rather difficult source to understand for various reasons. But yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So let's go on to now. Just to bring us back where we were, I gave an example of this Targum, this totally different way of looking at Song of Songs. Right? It has nothing to do with It has to do with Amer, has to do with Pharaoh, but an embellished retelling of the biblical story, and there are bits and pieces of that are in different places around rabbinic literature. And I brought two examples. One is from a totally different context of Midrash Tehillim on Psalm 18, commenting on God who rides Rochev Kruvim, the how God's presence manifests itself in this world. And would somebody like to read? James, you want to read this section?
Okay.
Number 6.
He rode on a cherub. When Pharaoh went out to chase after Israel, he said, "Give me a male horse to ride on, as it is light." What did the Holy One, blessed be he, do? He presented an image of one before him, just as Pharaoh had brought a male horse. So did the Holy One, blessed be he, bring a male horse and rode on it, as it is said, "When you ride on your horses, your chariots will come to life." Pharaoh then said, "Give me a female horse that can stand in battle." As when a male horse needs to urinate, it stops and delays, but a female horse walks and changes direction and is good in battle.
And I gave this one to you particularly as our expert in horse raising here. I'll bet that's something you probably didn't know.
Well, no, I did. I worked with quarter horses. I wasn't doing working horses, and
Yeah.
that is true. I hate to that a female is much, more stable as a
Oh,
horse.
really? Okay, good. Okay. I thought this was something that was imagined rabbinic, in the rabbinic imagination fantasy. But the reason I brought it, though, again, there's this talk about horses and Pharaoh in the context of the Exodus, and while this doesn't relate to our understanding of Song of Songs, really, it does, because that midrashic, where here it's brought as a proof text just to talk about this battle between God and Pharaoh, who's showing each other off in the and how God needs to manifest God's self physically to do battle with the bad guy. It does, of course, it's going to influence how people understand Shir HaShirim. And I would posit that this tradition is older than, I can't prove it, but I would say it's probably older than the tradition, older than the Targum, and it's taken upon the one who came up with this very long embellished translation of Song of Songs knew all this different kind of midrash from here and also from this next passage. James, maybe read another one from Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer.
Okay. Rabbi Kiva says the Israelites advanced to enter the Red Sea, but they returned backwards, fearing lest the water would come down over them. The tribe of Judah sanctified his great name and entered the sea first, and under the dominion of the hands likewise of the sons of Judah did all of Israel enter the sea after them. As it is said, Judah became his sanctuary, Israel his dominion. The Egyptians desired to follow after Israel, but they turned backwards, fearing lest the water would return over them. What did the Holy One, blessed be he, do? He appeared before them like a man riding on the back of a mare, and said to a steed in Pharaoh's chariot, the horse on which Pharaoh rode saw the mare, and it neighed and ran and entered the sea after it.
It sounds like something that may have been used in Prince of Egypt in the animated version.
Good.
And I wouldn't be surprised if it was used, because the people that made the Prince of Egypt, they consulted both with my other good friend and teacher, Victor Shenan at Hebrew University, and with Bert Wysotsky at JTS when they made the movie, making use of lots of Midrashei Aggadah. So what's happening here, and this is just on one phrase, the Susati part, this horse connected with Pharaoh, by the way, Susati, it may not mean mare at all in the absolute simple meaning of the text, because the taf ending, the Susati, may be part of a different kind of an ending of ancient Hebrew. I think Yair brings that up in his commentary. But none of that was evident to the rabbis. They're talking, and what really matters to them is there's a horse, there's Pharaoh, it's in the Song of Songs. How is it connected to what was already understood as the background of the Song of Songs? Ria.
So, this whole concept of female being the temptress And there's that story in the Talmud, I think, or Midrash, about the two rabbis. One is in the water, and there's a female across the river. And they're, this whole thing of it's an illusion, and or maybe there's one more than one. I can't remember all the details of where this temptress. So the temptress is now put into the body of a horse, and it is a backhanded compliment, but it maintains the power of the male in the telling of this crossing the sea, the Reed Sea, and all. It's an interesting continual story or concept that flows through that period.
Yeah, you're connecting with what Sylvia brought up at the very beginning about she would not see this as a compliment. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And it's actually dangerous. So
yeah.
And in the Song of Songs, you don't get any of that feeling. It's just that there's an equality about the love, and it's beautiful. And they've turned it into something that has a lot of problems. That's my thought.
And a good thought, but the irony would have been had they understood it as you and I and most of us here agree was the original intention, then we would have never heard about it.
Well, but how about you switch your brain around and you don't see it as a danger. You don't see sexuality as a danger, and you see it as part of the experience, a worldly experience, and lovely. That's how the Song of Songs puts it across.
No, Rhea, of course I understand. Of course I agree with you.
Yeah.
But the irony would have been had they not understood it in the male-centric way that they understood it, we would have not heard about it. We wouldn't see this book. Would have never reached our hands. That's my point.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, yeah.
Yes,
Okay.
James.
Rabbi?
Yes, James.
Yeah, I kind of see it's almost not so much, it's a compliment to women that they're the stable ones. And the males need to get control. It's like that's the issue almost. That they're trying to say with a good woman, it really helps the man.
I
Now
think
you get
Cynthia has an answer for you.
what?
Go. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Okay, so I kind of see it's almost like it's the woman who's the stable one. And men can lose themselves very easily. And so it's really the woman who's the stable one. And if you have a good, it's a blessing.
Okay. Sylvia?
Well, of course, that's the excuse that rabbinical teaching has used all through the years to keep women where they were, because, you wear a shtitel, you wear long sleeve shirts, because it's the men who will get excited by the women. It's not the women's fault necessarily, but they are kept back. And what you're saying, James, is that's exactly what Song of Songs is saying. It's the same old, same old, same old. And
No, I'm not saying that. No, I'm saying that you got to find the beauty in the woman.
oh, well, that's what they're saying too.
Yeah, yeah.
No, that's what they're saying too.
Right.
That's it. These excuses to keep the women out of synagogue, to keep the women from not being being able to take being obligated to prayer, which we don't do anymore, but which has been done all along, is because the men have to be controlled. And so they say that, but it also keeps the power structure just the way it is, male, female. And yeah.
Okay, let's go.
I could,
We could go back and forth forever,
Yeah.
and it's a machloket l'shem shemayim. We'll see it that way. But let's end today with Rashi, and Rashi's kind of introduction to how to understand this in his first. It's kind of at the beginning of his perush, his commentary to Song of Songs. Susan, do you want to read today?
Sure. God has spoken once. Twice I have heard this. From one verse emerge several explanations. However, in conclusion, a verse does not depart from its literal sense and meaning. Although the prophets have employed metaphors, let each metaphor be explained simply, each statement fitting its context.
Let's take a break just for a second. So that's a really quintessential framing of this as it is. There's, on one hand, you look at this text, there can be more than one, there could be two, I would say even more meanings to this, that goes for any biblical text. In this case, all the more so. But on the other hand, and there's a lot of ways to understand the metaphor, but you have to also understand the metaphor in as a simple, telling a simple statement, a story as well. Metaphor also has to have meaning in what is, otherwise it's not a good metaphor, is it, right? If you, it's got to be drawn from some, my translation of Rashi would, it has to be drawn from some real place in life, a real situation in life. And Ria, this is where, and Sylvia, this is where perhaps we could find, some glimpses of redemption of the rabbinic understanding. But let's let him go ahead. Go ahead and read the next paragraphs.
I have seen multiple midrashai Aggadah. Some organize the entire book in one complete compilation of midrash, while others have pieces scattered in multiple places.
So what I wanted to tell you, for instance, the Targum of Song of Songs is the first thing, like you said, it's organized into one particular corpus. He had that. The other one is Midrash Shir Hashirim, which we're going to see next time. We'll see an excerpt from that. But the other thing he says, it's also sporadically in different parts of rabbinic literature. That's why I brought those two sections beforehand as well. Okay, go ahead.
I say that King Shlomo saw prophetically that in the future, Israel will undergo exile after exile, destruction after destruction, and they will mourn in exile for their original glory, remembering the original love by which they were separated from all other peoples. And they will say, I will go and return to my first husband, for then I fared better than now. And they will remember his kindnesses and their own value and the goodly things promised to them in the end of days.
Go ahead.
And Shlomo wrote this book prophetically in the language of a widowed woman who longs for her husband, who clings to her beloved, remembering how she loved him in her youth, and she admits her failings. And even her beloved is pained by her pain and remembers the kindness of her youth, the comeliness of her beauty, and the quality of her deeds, in which he was bound up with her in intense love. And he tells her that he does not willingly bring her grief, nor has she been sent away permanently. For she is still his wife, and he her husband, and he will return to her in the future.
Okay.
Remembering the good old days, which may not have been so good.
Right. But of course, when you're living in Europe over most of the last 2,000 years, or in many places around the world, everything very more often than not, there certainly felt like there would have been good old days. I think we have a different reality here in our reality today. But so some reactions to that. This is Rashi's kind of spreading this became or has become or is the normative traditional, maybe I'll say Orthodox way of understanding the Song of Songs. That yes, there might be some background to it, and it has to make sense as on the ultimate shot level of the text, but that's not what's important here. What's important, what Shlomo HaMelech, Solomon, King Solomon, has given us this lesson, which is almost meta-historical for our people, a relationship with God.
Yeah, it's still at first blush far-fetched, but it's a lot better than the Pharaoh's mare connection, because
Well,
yeah, it's extended and um, to me it works a lot better as an as a connection.
that might be a pedagogical mistake of mine to juxtapose this. Maybe we should have started with this, because Rashi's giving an all-inclusive, holistic,
Mhm.
and Natsusati Paro, I purposely went there because Avudraham went there. Avudraham chose that of all the things he could have said. He focused in on those on those words right there, and just to show how, even ad absurdum, how it might go. But yeah, I totally hear what you're saying. Others?
I think it describes to Solomon a vision, like an Uber vision. It gives, well, first of all, it assumes that Solomon wrote it all, but also it ascribes to the author of this thing a kind of layered vision buried into the poetry, that the author buried the true meaning in the poetry. And it's like we don't have to, it's not me reading into it, it's Solomon putting it there for me to see. It flips the dynamic of the thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's the ultimate, what my a teacher of mine, Professor Seymour Fox of blessed memory, used to say, it's a conversation stopper. Once you say that, what are you going to do? Yeah. Ria.
Yeah, so I don't see it that way. I'm sorry that Rashi gave this interpretation. If we just look at the poetry and the sense of love, the emotion, the physical love that exudes from it, what's wrong with seeing it in that way? And because I don't know Hebrew that much just to read it, but if we took a literary analysis and looked at the actual words, it would be nice to, with a literature person, to be able to pull out some of the references instead of giving it a societal analysis, that you give it a literary analysis. And that the poem itself is lovely. The idea of this wonderful love. And so that's what and I'm sure that there's literature about an analysis, a literary analysis rather than a rabbinic analysis. So it would be interesting.
Yeah, so that would be another topic, by the way. In other words, the topic of this particular class or these sessions are the Shirashim in the Haggadah and the Aggadah. And I wanted to connect it to Pesach. That's why we're doing it right after Pesach. Ultimately, we've done it before. But absolutely, the important reading of this text, I would agree with you, is what we call the pshat, the contextual meaning. Sylvia, final comment for everybody.
And yes, that's true. But I think that Rashi's commentary was to save it for canonization. That's what his purpose was to make us know and to make other rabbis know that this was an important song in the rabbinical tradition, in the literature. So save it from the bawdy houses, really, and to make it part of our canonization. I think really that's what I'm reading. That's what I
And
think
that's
he
what
did.
we're gonna start with next week. We'll start with that little tiny piece of little tiny little tiny scrap of information we have about Song of Songs and the canonization. It's really a tiny scrap, and it's not so easy to understand because of the context of purity and impurity. We'll start with that next week in the Mishnah. Thank you all for being here. May this spring bring us more and more of redemption and a way to look at the world around us in a very poetic, very real, and elevating the value of eros. All right, my friends, be well. Shavua